absolutely nothing. The fact that I may want to kill those people 6 weeks later, but at least we know we're, you know, we believe each other, or at least they believe me.
Okay, any questions? Anything you want us to talk about?
It's your chance, guys. Come on, chime in. There's more class time available. Land development questions. Who did the land development questions? Do you actually have questions that you have not answered yet? Come on.
I have a general, I don't think it necessarily relates to what we just talked about, but I don't know, I guess you sort of hear how baby boomers were the driving force behind maybe development back in the day. Maybe today's day and age it's millennials, at least from what I've read as far as
Driving force for what?
who you're marketing, since it's just such a
What,
large
residential? Or?
Yeah, for residential. I guess I've read contradicting articles where it's maybe suburban versus urban as far as where they're heading. Do you have any opinion on?
I think millennials and boomers are competing for the same residential development. And I'll give you an example. The president of ZOM is a gentleman named Greg West, very cool guy. He's actually the district council chair for ULI right now. Greg was discussing a project I had asked him to speak on a panel at a forum in downtown Fort Lauderdale about the market rate housing versus affordable. And we had an affordable housing developer, they were talking about it. And Greg, they got into the demographics question. And Greg said they had the most amazing thing happen they have a project downtown Miami, high rise. It's 400 units, rental, it's right off Brickell, it's in the Brickell Center or something or other, one of those. He said the majority, they would say 40% of their tenants are millennials and 40% of them are boomers. And very few in the middle there. That they are absolutely competing for the same market in downtown Miami. Very interesting. We're seeing that nationally because ZOM's all over the place. Really interesting stuff.
There's a lot of bad data. There's a lot of great data, but there's too much data. And I talked about that this morning, that too much sometimes is dangerous. And like which way are the millennials going? Are they eventually going to become homeowners, or are they permanently embedded in rental for the rest of their life? It's almost like, in terms of the baby boomers, which are people who were born between 1945 and 1963, 64, that, and there's still 70 million of them, that they're almost like not important. But there's this fixation on millennials, when the real money and power in our country, in our economy, are the baby boomers. They're the ones that got all the money. It's the way it's always been. So who's going to affect markets and who's going to affect the economy more? Well, it's the baby boomers. Millennials just don't have enough wealth, don't have enough money to, I mean, they're the future. I mean, they're working their way in like they should. They have their own thoughts and their own, it's not like grandpa anymore or dad anymore, but that's okay. Life's always been that way. I mentioned this morning on multifamily, and Greg said he's very bullish about multifamily. I'm extremely bullish on multifamily. I look at the history of it. I look at the concept of it. And Tom, you would know about this. You go to Europe, people rent. I mean, we have friends in Italy. Their family has controlled apartments for hundreds of years. I mean, they wouldn't think of owning anything. They actually, I don't know, the law in Italy, I think you can't throw them out or something, I don't know, but the point is, Europe is a rental philosophy. It always has been. They migrated to the United States after the colonial days and all the way through into the 20th century. And we were a rental country. In 1940, the outset of World War II, at least for the United States, we had 38% ownership in the United States. 38%. That was normal. 2 and 3 families was common to live in one house or one apartment. Generational living and all, that was all here. The war came along, the United States came down out the other side of the war, the other shoot, this economic powerhouse, had more money to know what to do, it had all this capacity of manufacturing, and I can go on and on because I do a presentation on this also. But we created the American dream at that point, which was a single family house with a mommy and daddy and 1.9 kids. And that was the #1 demographic profile in the United States in 1960. I mean, and the thing then was hurry up and get to a position that you can buy a house as fast as you can. And so we built, and then 2007, we got up to 70% ownership. And then the world imploded because that was not sustainable for a lot of reasons, for money, for cultural reasons, for social reasons, for a lot of things. We're down to about 63.5% right now. Many demographers believe it's going to go under 60, float somewhere in the mid 50, 55 in the next 20 years. And I suggest it's permanent. And then, if it's not an apartment, it's a single-family house. So we talked about that this morning. 7 or 8% of all the single-family houses in the United States today are rented. And a good number of them are owned by Wall Street equity funds. It's a whole new industry. And let me tell you, they're not stupid people. They didn't invest billions and billions in housing in America on a whim. They believe this is here to stay. And they've created a whole industry. They've created a whole asset management industry.
It's the same thing happening with cars in the near future because it's going to be so cheap to get from A to B that you don't need to buy cars anymore.
Well, no one's going to buy cars in the future.
Yeah, it's like you have, like there's a company called Vugo in New York right now, just won a battle that you can do, it's kind of like Uber, but it's free. Like, so if the consumer sits in a taxi, they have an iPad in front and the advertisers pay for your cab fare. So in other words, even the taxis and the Ubers are becoming free for people.
Everybody own a car here? Raise your hand. You own a car? Just around the world, how many hours a day do you drive your car? I mean, out of 24 hours, how many hours? I'm not trying to embarrass you or anything, just
Like an hour?
2, 1.5.
You said it's the worst investment you can make.
You paid $40,000 for that car? 35, 40, whatever it is? Isn't that the worst goddamn investment you can make in your life? Think about the rate of return on that money. I mean, so you're smart people, and I talk to my granddaughters who are just a little younger than you, and they say they have cars now. And my oldest granddaughter just turned the car in. She said, "I don't need it anymore." She's living in Jersey City and she works in Manhattan. And she said, "I don't need a car." And I said, she says, "I hope I never own a car again." And her sister, younger sister, she says, "I don't want to own a car." And I don't want to market research just on them, but the point is, 25% of the people living in downtown Miami right now do not have a driver's license. I mean, if that doesn't tell you something, this is where we're going, and autonomous driverless cars are going to step right in and fill the gap. Yeah.
What happened to the big car companies?
Wait a minute, we're going
What will happen to the big cars companies? GM, Toyota.
They're going to build the cars for the people that own the driverless cars. Google expects to own, by 2025, expects to own over 250 million cars. Google expects to own that many. Somebody's got to build those cars for them. They just want to control your transportation. And just think, if you're only paying for transportation when and if you need it, come on, don't tell me that's not going to help your monthly budget.
No insurance, no traffic tickets.
A whole
So why do I have to keep building parking structures? Why do I have to keep building parking structures? It's actually, there's an interesting dynamic happening at the local level. Cities are trying to, they've reduced the parking ratios all over. If you go to Flagler Village and try to find a parking space to go to the brass, whatever, forget it. If you don't live there, there's no place to put your car because there's very little excess parking. And we're talking with local planners and design professionals. How can parking structures, if you accept the fact that until we have driverless cars and better transit, we still are all going to be driving a car, and we have to park that car. But if you build the traditional parking structure is 8-foot floor over floor with these ramps and these stuff that you can't do anything but park cars in it.
Very expensive too.
And very expensive to build. So what are we going to do? And some of the responses from the parking system companies, fascinating stuff, is you build a big concrete box and then the parking spaces are actually kind of a Lego building thing. They're metal and they're, electronic, and we do this also that at the point where we no longer need a 400 space parking structure, and maybe we only need a 200 space parking structure, half of that building can be converted to a productive use. Because if you build it as the usual parking deck, it's never going to be anything but a parking deck.
Well, we have seen in Japan.
Or you live on a slant.
Yeah.
Who says that you have to drive your car to the parking spot in the parking structure rather than leave it in the front and you have like a warehousing system actually store it for you?
That's
we call it valet parking here in Miami.
But
Oh, yeah.
will there be a need? Will there be a need for that much of that? See, that's the whole point.
Well, but wait, before we get to the need question, let me tell you what happens technically, because I tried to permit that kind of the parking where you drive in and an elevator takes you. You run into problems at the municipal level. Number one, are they going to back up on the street? So you have to have a lot of space to store the car before it goes into the elevator. There's only room for one at a time. What happens? Do you have enough backup energy in the event of a hurricane and we all lose power? I mean, there are design solutions, but are the practicalities of it yet where we need them to be? I'm not sure.
It's a generation shift. It's going to take at least 2 generations to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question for you. In the next 10 years, what is your projection on which area of real estate will have the highest demand for attorney services?
For attorneys?
For attorney services.
It's not all of the above. All of the above. You don't do anything without us. I'm sorry, you just don't.
They rigged the system. Are you
I
kidding?
mean, I think that the different question might be how, and what are law firms dealing with? There are more and more, how do we deliver more cost-effective and therefore valuable services to a client as technology progresses? And I can tell you what my firm is doing. We have an innovation committee that I just saw a presentation by them. This whole system, it's called Luminance or something. I don't know if this is but it is a document creation system where you basically plug in a couple of words and it does that document. Now, on the real estate transactional side of law, there's a bug in here that's making all
There's like 10 of them.
Okay, so,
I'm not raising my hand.
yeah. I'm not batting it, yeah. On the transactional side, I think that there's real efficiencies that you're going to be seeing. For the stuff that I do, I once had a secretary come to work for me, and a month after she was with me, she said, I'm not working for you. I can't, every document is different. It's true. She wanted a more routine. We sent her to trust and estate. She was very happy because everything they do is the same. But in a land use practice, you are pretty much making it up. Each development agreement, each, we have to write resolutions, reports, this and that. There's not a lot of uniformity. But on the transactional side, I think you can clearly use technology
to deal with changes.
yeah. And that's where I think I mean, the law business is going to many different systems, not just in real estate, to that kind of system.
We'll take one here.
My question is, for students who are leaving the program now with the state of everything, who have limited real estate background, or, I mean, most of us have at least some experience in some realm. What would be a good avenue to like break into the industry?
Get a job.
Just
I can't make this clearer for you. Go anywhere. You don't know what you don't know. To target yourself knowing so little, you got to get into the trench and you got to start getting involved in something. I tell you this, you got to trust me with this. It will lead to where you're destined to go in life. But just go find a job that pays you a decent wage and you like the work and everything, and start learning. And when you've learned everything they're willing to teach you, go somewhere else. But if you start out with a degree and knowing almost nothing, how do you pick the right thing? I mean, you don't know what you're picking. So I'm telling you, don't waste your time on this. Just go get a job in the real estate industry somewhere.
And I think you also, I'd add something to that.
Chuck, yeah, go ahead. I have a very important add-on for that.
Go ahead.
Near award ceremony Thursday night, Rookie of the Year, mid-30-year-old guy, talked that he, right after college, he did multiple small jobs in the industry for about 10 years, 18 months in the job. Milchek?
Marcus.
Marcus Milchek. Was part of the award-winning team, but the Rookie of the Year, about 18 months on the job there. Earned his honors in the smaller other jobs and went big and was recognized here with an industry association as Rookie of the Year, as the new shooting star to the moon for the industry. So work the trenches, learn, don't be shy to quit that job and go into the next one.
Well, I was kind of going in a similar line, but I think you kind of have, there's a lot of opportunities out there. There are small development companies. There's medium, there's big. There's, the list that Tony showed, asset management to development. To a certain extent, I think you look at the company and am I a good fit? I think this is threshold. A, do they have a job that I find interesting? B, am I a good fit with where that company's head is at? And I'll be candid, I have a 27-year-old son who is evaluating whether he wants to stay, he's in his 5th year, he's a web engineer, whether he wants to stay with the large company that he's with or spin off to something else. And we were just having a similar conversation, and I said, the bottom line is, you have to decide where do you think you're gonna fit in. He knows what he wants to do. You have to first say, what do I want to do within the industry? And even if you don't know what it is, feel free to talk to the folks about it. But I also think when you pick a company, make sure it's the environment that you want to be in. Because if you like I'm a big organization person. When I was making a change a few years ago, I knew I wanted, when I decided I was still going to practice law, because that was threshold #1 for me, then I knew I needed to stay in a large firm because I enjoy that environment. I enjoy the collegial aspect of a multidisciplinary law firm. Now, it's the same in any kind of business. Is it big enough for me? Is it small enough for me? I think size does matter in that respect. Chris, you want to talk about your opportunity? Can I embarrass you?
Sure.
So Chris asked me a moment ago during the break if I did any work with D.R. Horton, and actually just started a project with them. So why don't you explain why you were inquiring?
I was inquiring because since we were talking about land development, and that's why I was very specific about which parcels you were talking about. I'm actually going to be working with them for acquisitions, starting in a few weeks.
Doing what?
So he is my client in a couple weeks.
Doing what?
Land acquisitions.
Land acquisition, learn.
And that's
It
new
gets-
since when?
Which division? Here in South Florida?
And yeah, Coconut Creek.
And by the way, the person he's been working for is currently my client, and he's terrific. And yeah, you're gonna have a good time.
I'm super stoked, but
You know, D.R. Horton is, by building count, is the largest home builder in the world. Not in dollars, but because their average selling price is lower than
More
the average
affordable.
selling price of Lamar, who was the second biggest. But they have a culture. I'm not gonna tell you what it is, but no, I didn't mean that to be. Going back to what Debbie said, you got to find out that that's the culture that you're comfortable with. But while you're there, you're gonna learn. That's the important thing.
You're paying
I mean, you're working for one of the biggest builders in the world, and you know, you might be in a narrow slot, but pay attention, get engaged, ask for responsibilities. The other thing is, just along these lines, when you go out looking for a job, and you gotta take this now from somebody who has hired thousands. When you go out looking for a job, you have a right in that meeting to ask questions. You have a right to ask about their philosophy. You have a right to ask about what your potential future in that company would be.
I asked a lot of questions.
And if they don't give you the right answer, you don't want to work there. You want to work for somebody that is conscious of the importance that you're satisfied to. So, if there's, you know, hey, listen, this is a job. Come and work here, and don't worry about it. You don't want to work there. You're gonna be unhappy. Getting up in the morning, you're not gonna like it.
Well, it's a question for Debbie. So, although I'm in asset management, I come across a lot of agreements for the covenants and the land use for the projects I'm managing. And so I'm noticing that some of these blankets come with the use is like maybe 25 years, 30 years. What happens with all this affordable housing when they get to the end life of this cycle?
Okay.
Because I'm seeing conversions where income-based, not income restricted, but income-based housing is converting at a market, kicking everybody out. And so obviously there's a housing crisis with seniors in South Florida and maybe some other markets, but I'm thinking like 30 years forward because like, I'm concerned about just retirement because I'm seeing people in crisis in their 70s.
So there's a couple of things built into it. Let's first talk why there are the income restrictions. Does everybody understand what the income restriction is and how it plays out in an affordable? You have to, for example, if you are in a 60% of area median income, AMI, development, you adjust it for family size, and there are federal HUD standards for this. Before you can qualify to be a tenant in an income restricted development or income eligible development, you have to show that you don't earn more than blah, blah, blah. Okay, 60% AMI. That's because that project was funded through federal low-income housing tax credits. Low-income housing tax credits are a subsidy that are provided for affordable developments that allow the developer to get basically almost interest-free, both in equity investment and financing for a big chunk of their project. The federal government has required, in many of those cases, only a 15-year restriction. Some now, state of Florida has upped that to 25. Broward County, in its infinite wisdom, is talking about putting a 50-year income restriction. And when that time period is over, it's market rate housing and it goes back into a market rate. There is no protection. Now, I am working with a group, and this is wearing my community involvement hat, that we are trying to figure out. We are in kind of informal group, and as it comes together, we'll give it a name and attach it to something, but it's not there yet. We're trying to figure out how you can encourage a property owner of a rental development to keep it affordable. For example, one of the ideas we had was you have to incentivize this, because they can make a lot more money if it's a market rate development and not income restricted. Because just to give you an example, the typical one bedroom in a 60% AMI development would be one bedroom would be $700 a month in rent. If that were a market rate, it would be $1,200 a month in rent. We're talking real money here. So why would someone keep something at an affordable level if they weren't required to? We could give them certain real estate tax benefits, reductions. We could give them low interest loans to upgrade the property and do improvements. I mean, there's a lot of soft money kind of things that could be done to encourage landowners or rental development owners to keep those units where they are. Now, if you want to read an interesting study on what the real housing crisis is, both nationally and in Florida, there is a report done by United Way. United Way did the ALICE report. ALICE stands for adults living at, basically it means that they are cost-burdened households. Nationally, the #1 cost-burdened, meaning that household is spending more than 30% of its monthly take-home on housing. The highest percentage, 44% of the population of Broward County, is the highest cost-burdened community in the nation, which has caused the county to wake up. Broward County Commission in this year's budget put a big $5 million aside.
Yeah.
They have a couple of $1 billion budget, by the way. $5 million aside to do something on affordable housing. Not sure what they're doing with it yet. We're trying to find that out. May know more in a week or two, because the county administrator's holding a little bit of a summit to discuss that with some select folk. And a friend of mine was invited, and she's going to tell us all about that. So it is a very real issue. It's become more of an issue in Broward County because I've always said we don't have a housing problem, supply problem. We have a low wage problem. We have too many wages that are not high enough for people to afford to live here.
That's also very true for Miami-Dade County.
Miami-Dade is worse, but
Worse.
for whatever reason, because of the way the national numbers played out, we came up worse than Miami-Dade. There was an article in, part of the reason in Miami-Dade is because there is a greater number of people who are in poverty. Miami-Dade County, though, produces about 1,000 affordable, meaning 60% and below AMI, housing every year. And they do that because Miami-Dade has a surtax, a transfer tax on documentary stamps, which no place else in the state of Florida is allowed to do it without a statutory change, because Miami-Dade is a constitutional county. They were formed around the same time that the state of Florida was formed, which was, I think, 1868, and they still carry forward a constitutional charter, so they have a whole bunch of things they can do that other 67 counties in the state of Florida can't do. So they are as cost burdened, but they are meeting their demand ever so slightly better than us because they have another funding. So.
I think when the 30 years is up or the 40 years is up, 100 lawyers will show up claiming it's unconstitutional to take it away. And some judge will put an injunction on it to stop it. And they'll play with this thing for years, just like rent control in New York City.
Tony, it's not happening, but it's happening. There's, in fact, the Terwilliger Institute, which is the affordable housing arm of ULI, they did a study that showed that all of these, the 15-year tax credit projects are all coming of age all over the country. Interestingly, Florida doesn't have a lot of those. That was not our issue for such a long time, that we're not having as much a problem, but those units are going market rate, and that's that. It's not even a debate.
Anything else? Because
I heard we were the 4th worst in the world. #1 in the U.S., 4th in the world on affordability.
Cost burden.
Yes.
the Alice report is actually very interesting when you start to look and understand how people are spending. But it's really a function of not enough people make enough money in this community. It's too many low-paying jobs. And if you look at our industries, which are hospitality, huge number of people who are in low-wage jobs, tourism, same thing. The real estate industry, quite frankly, a lot of people are day workers. You know, they're the laborers. They're not making. We're not a union state. We're not New York. It's also why people come here.
But on the balance scale, a good part of that problem comes from the fact that things are very expensive here. You know, it's a matter of, I have so much money to spend and I need so much money to live here. I mean, you know, if you go to Boise, Idaho, and you go up to a bar and you ask for a martini, it's about $6.
That Feather Lounge, which was one of my favorite watering hole, was about 8 to 10.
If you go for a martini in Miami Beach, it's $14.
Tony, if you do a price comparison across the nation in terms of martini and cocktails, it's St. Patrick's Day, 10 minutes out.
We always look here. I mean, I've been in South Florida since 1969. We always looked at ourselves as, yeah, we don't make a lot of money here, but we have this great weather and we don't have state income tax. And we've used this, you know, and we looked at California, which had the most outrageous, we're paying so much better and everything, and said, well, you have to out there because it costs so much to live there, which is true. The point is that the cost factor in South Florida has gone up tremendously, but the wages have not traveled with it. And this is where we got this big wage gap. I mean, the cost of housing alone to live here is just insane. But anyway, I only have a few more minutes. I got somebody picking me up. Anything else that you want to ask? I mean, Debbie's willing to stay to 6 or 7 if you want.
I beg your pardon, I'm just checking from, you know, I'm a very well-trained wife. What do I need to pick up on the way? No text, so I know the list from before is still good. Okay.
I think there's time for one more question, and then I'll make my cocktail comment and then we close it.
I was going to ask for your email just because it's not on here, but like Debbie's is on here, but yours isn't on here.
While you guys are doing networking events, on that note, the comment here about the cocktail that we made my old place. So the other old place was Cincinnati, Ohio. And I have a dear friend living in New York. He comes over and hangs out with us. There's 6, 7 people at the table in a cocktail bar. And Stephen keeps paying the tab, like literally round after round. And we're like, come on, Stephen, it's our turn to pay. And he's like, no, you 6 guys are cheaper in Cincinnati for cocktails than happy hour on a date in Manhattan Island. So that said, it's St. Patrick's Day. Be careful. Drink responsibility if you do choose so. Take an Uber. Don't drive. I would like to thank you, Tony and Debbie, for your time.
I hope I'm going to see you again.
This was absolutely fantastic input, absolutely fantastic knowledge transfer, and I hope the students really learned a lot the way I learned from you tonight. That's the day. Thank you.
Make sure you finish your degree. Don't quit.